Entertainment is all about giving the audience what they want, and while commercially successful blockbusters tend to live or die by this maxim, it's also fair to say that filmmakers and studios don't always know exactly what puts butts in seats. For while the majority of these 10 movie franchises have at least served up the expected big budget spectacle, they've also placed a baffling focus on plot elements, characters and themes that no audience member in their right mind gave the faintest care about. Thankfully, most of them didn't ruin their movies outright, but it's still odd that each series is nevertheless pressing ahead as though they're a vital franchise component, rather than a silly affectation viewers are forced to put up with. So with that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 10 movie franchise staples nobody actually cares about. Number 10. Family is everything. The Fast and the Furious. There's no denying that the Fast and the Furious franchise has become a mammoth box office success, largely thanks to the international appeal of its massively diverse cast. And while the theme of family has always been prevalent throughout the series, the last few entries have leaned hard into it, in a manner so aggressively sappy and sentimental it verges on self-parody. As thoroughly self-consciously silly as these films are, they actually take their family is everything spiel completely seriously, as though the audience is genuinely invested in this corny hokum beyond the likability of the cast and the inevitable vehicular shenanigans they get involved in. People are here for the charming actors and absurd car chases, certainly not for Vin Diesel spitting out the word family every 5 minutes.
Family.
Number 9. Solomon Lane as the main villain. Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible's fifth film, Rogue Nation, introduced the villain Solomon Lane, who most fans quite reasonably expected to be a one-off antagonist, as has been the series' tradition. And yet, recent follow-up Fallout opted to bring Lane back, and with him again living to fight another day at the film's end, it seems highly probable that he'll return once more for the 7th film. This would all be well and good if Lane was actually a remotely interesting character. It's clear that Christopher McQuarrie wants to make Lane the Blofeld of the franchise, that is, an impossibly calculated, recurring, iconic baddie. Yet between Harris's subdued performance and the character's general lack of presence, it just doesn't quite work. It's especially telling that Harris himself reportedly had no interest returning for Fallout and had to have his arm twisted. Given that Henry Cavill's August Walker made for a far more compelling antagonist in the movie, it's a shame he was killed off while Lane lived. Number 8. Johnny Depp's casting, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Eyebrows were firmly raised when Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them concluded with the shock reveal that franchise villain Gellert Grindelwald had been hiding in plain sight the entire movie, disguised as Colin Farrell's Percival Graves, and was now going to be played by Johnny Depp. It's a choice which flummoxed fans for several reasons. For starters, Farrell did a fantastic job as Graves, and few would have complained if he ended up playing Grindelwald also. Furthermore, general audiences had grown wary of Depp's penchant for soulless mugging by this point, and it didn't help that his villain's bizarre appearance made him impossible to take seriously. In fairness, Depp wasn't the worst thing about last year's sequel, The Crimes of Grindelwald, but it was still tough to escape the feeling that Warner Bros. Really dropped the ball by insisting upon Depp's insertion into the franchise. This is unaided by the actor's recent personal controversies, which have seen many call for Grindelwald to be recast once again. Warner Bros. Executives are meanwhile reportedly freaking out about J.K. Rowling publicly expressing her support for the actor and possibly boxing them into a corner creatively as a result. Number 7. Nostalgia. Star Wars. It wasn't surprising to anyone that Star Wars The Force Awakens was a shameless nostalgia trip, recycling countless plot elements from A New Hope and effectively serving as a victory lap for legacy characters Han Solo and General Leia, but it was still really good. And considering how wretched the prequel trilogy was,
I don't like sand.
You can't really blame J.J. Abrams and company for assembling a safe sequel that was, admittedly, a bit too reliant on nostalgia. Sequel The Last Jedi seemed to indicate a move away from the dew-eyed nostalgia bait of its predecessor, only for the movie's polarizing fan response to prompt a sharp change of course, or so it seems. Everything we've seen of The Rise of Skywalker so far suggests it's going to be far more fan service infused than The Last Jedi, returning to the safe comfort of familiarity with the return of Palpatine, sentimental repurposing of Carrie Fisher's deleted scenes, and of course, the belated dusting off of Lando Calrissian. It feels like a massive reactionary move, and an overcorrection to the melodramatic online screeching which, in honesty, doesn't reflect the mindset of your average moviegoer, hence the film's A cinema score. If Star Wars is going to endure beyond Ford, Fisher and Hamill, Kathleen Kennedy needs to understand that the nostalgia well can't be drained forever, and The Last Jedi's success with general audiences proves that it really doesn't need to. Remember, nobody hates Star Wars as much as a Star Wars fan. Number 6. The origins of the Xenomorph, Alien. It's fair to say that the Alien franchise has been in freefall for quite some time, but up until Ridley Scott's Prometheus, the series seemed to be relatively content to keep the origins of the Xenomorph ambiguous, and rightly so. Prometheus ultimately ended up jerking everybody around, both fans craving a concrete explanation for the Xenomorph and those demanding a standalone story, yet sequel Alien Covenant truly crystallized just how little fans truly want to know about the genesis of the iconic movie monster. By effectively explaining that the classic Xenos were created by malevolent android David in a rather dopey fashion that ran counter to all established series lore no less, all of the intrigue and cosmic unknown horror of the creature's existence was stripped away. Covenant's box office failure was the most apparent rejection of the series' recent obsession with over-explaining the Xenomorph's existence, and all the proof Scott needs that the planned third film needs to focus less on the Xeno and more on David. Number 5. All the human characters, the Monsterverse. We may be only 3 movies deep into the Monsterverse to date, but these films have made it abundantly clear just how disproportionately the franchise values boring, forgettable human characters over its feature attractions. The 2014 Godzilla film was widely criticised for its excessive focus on uninteresting people, especially after Bryan Cranston bit the bullet so early, and its recent sequel didn't appear to learn the lesson by constantly cutting dull human subplots in between all the monster mayhem. Kong Skull Island similarly gave the likes of Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston cardboard cutout characters to deal with, ensuring that every moment without the titular behemoth was a boring one. While there's virtually no chance of a studio ever having the balls to make a monster movie that's focused strictly on the monsters with virtually no human import, it sure would be nice if they'd appreciate just how little audiences care about the human beings in these films. Number 4. The T-800, Terminator. Before you reach for the pitchfork, let's just clarify that we all love Arnold, and there's no denying that the T-800 is his signature movie role. Yet while he is the undeniable cornerstone on which the Terminator franchise was built, his continued incorporation into the franchise is beginning to feel a little desperate. Arnie's role in Terminator 3 was fun fan service, a few goofy excesses aside, but Terminator Salvation had to rely on a garish CGI puppet while Arnie was busy, and Genesis as a whole felt like a lame, cynical, nostalgia-fueled exercise. Arnie is of course set up to return for the upcoming Terminator Dark Fate, and while one hopes that this will be the torch-passing exercise for the franchise, it's also tough to imagine the series truly letting go of Arnold until he's no longer with us. As iconic as his character may be, the franchise doesn't have a future with him, and the only way for it to grow is to cultivate interesting new heroes and villains rather than simply resting back on fanservice for as long as Arnie is still alive. Number 3. Vision and Scarlet Witch's romance, the MCU. The Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't have a great track record when it comes to superhero romances, as despite a few exceptions, they almost always come off forced and wildly unnecessary. Yet most of these perfunctory love-ins are at least easily ignored and have little bearing on the overarching narrative of the MCU, though the same sadly can't quite be said for Vision and Scarlet Witch's romance. The feeling started to kindle in Captain America Civil War before they became fully fledged in Avengers Infinity War, defined by the third act's dramatic crux of Wanda agonizing over destroying Vision to save the universe. Except all the heavy lifting was done off-screen, and so it really didn't have the desired impact. Anyone killing their lover for the greater good is brutal, but the series' sterile depiction of their relationship made it less impactful than it could have been. Endgame, of course, continued to sell Wanda's heartbreak following her revival, and it's already been confirmed that the two characters are set to star in the Disney Plus TV series WandaVision. Somehow. You gotta love Vision and you gotta love Scarlet Witch, but most people don't seem to really care whether they're together or not. Number 2, Jean Grey, X-Men. There's no denying that until his recent demise, Wolverine was the much-loved MVP of Fox's X-Men franchise. And while the two iterations of Professor X and Magneto aren't that far behind, the series has always had a bit of a baffling fondness for Jean Grey. Jean may be an undeniable mainstay in the X-Men comics, but the initial X-Men movie trilogy badly bungled the character despite a solid effort from Janssen, taking the Dark Phoenix saga and turning it into the utter misfire that was X-Men: The Last Stand. If repeating a previous mistake defines insanity, then it's tough to imagine why Fox has allowed The Last Stand co-writer Simon Kinberg to both write and direct what's effectively a remake of the Dark Phoenix saga with the final film in this continuity. Dark Phoenix's marketing desperately tried to convince audiences that Sophie Turner's uninteresting Jean Grey was worthy of the central villain role, yet the early reviews indicate the film just failed to do her justice once again, despite a serious step up in form from Sophie Turner. Fans have felt disconnected from the soul of the X-Men movies for a while, and a smaller scale finale to the series would have been so much more interesting than Dark Phoenix was. Look at Logan and see that the X-Men work brilliantly on an intimate scale. Number 1, The Fate of the Dinosaurs, Jurassic Park. Though Steven Spielberg's original Jurassic Park did an incredible job of depicting the awe-inspiring wonder of the genetically engineered dinosaurs, the luster wore off incredibly quickly with a glut of sequels, which in turn caused audiences to care a whole lot less about the dinos themselves. The franchise has been a bit schlocky for 4 straight entries in a row, which clashes harshly with its continued attempts to make audiences feel something for the creatures, especially in the tone-deaf 5th film, Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. The movie misguidedly finds its heroes fighting to save the abominations of nature, despite Dr. Ian Malcolm making a convincing case for their extinction. When the creatures are accidentally unleashed upon humanity at the end, one can safely assume it resulted in plenty of death, both human and dinosaur. These movies aren't scoring billion-plus box office paydays because people are emotionally attached to the dinosaurs. It's because the trashy spectacle is popcorn-munching awesomeness. At the end of the day, people just want to see dinosaurs eating people and running riots. At least if the next film fully leans into the ridiculous potential carnage of dinosaurs among civilization, it could favour brainless fun over straining sentimentality. And there you have it, folks, 10 movie franchise staples nobody actually cares about. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know a lot of these are extremely controversial and there are a lot of good points on both sides. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.